In this session, we are going to talk about setting up of the scene, how a scene is set up, and what role environment plays in which you are placing that scene or setting that scene, and how does one make it work as a screenwriter, how does one make it work. So an effective approach is to use the 7 elements of a scene or sequence. It's something that is spoken about by a lot of screenwriters, and it's one of the most easier way to approach scene writing, so to say. So we have moved from screenwriting in general and the broader concepts to scene writings, and there are scenes which stitches a film together. So let's look at them. So it uses them when you rough out a scene, but especially during the rewriting process. So when you are using the scenes and developing the scenes, I had told you one thing that screenwriting is also a lot of rewriting. It requires a lot of rewriting involvement. At that particular period of time, these 7 elements can come into picture because you are expanding the universe. You are trying to introduce the universe. Sometimes you are trying to expand the universe. In that, these small little scenes work like situations. And unlike in a novel or short story, your scenes that you are writing are going to appear in the scene, in the film. People are going to see that. And as a screenwriter, if you are not the director, or if you are not anybody who is from the production crew, you're not a sound designer or you're not a cinematographer, then your vision has to move beyond the literary. You know what I mean? That it cannot be written in the format of a novel or a short story because you are writing for the film. So it has to be visually propagated in such a way that it comes out very organically, right, contributing to the film. This process begins with the writer properly formatting the page with scene headings that describe whether it takes place interior or exterior. There is a specific location, and then the time, what time of the day the scene is taking place. A scene takes place in a single location. The moment locations change, a scene changes. So they're very fundamental things. Please try and remember that a scene works out only in a single location. The moment you change the location, part of the scene changes. A sequence is a series of scenes that tell a short story within the context of a larger story. So that part is extremely crucial. You have to remember that scenes are tied together to create a sequence. So try and kind of do a comparison with how things move in language or literature, that you take up, words and words um, come together to form a sentence, sentences come together to form a paragraph, paragraphs comes together to give you an essay or something. So consider film to be an essay and then go backwardly to the scenes and shots. So a word could be equivalent to a shot. A sentence could be equivalent to a scene. A paragraph could be equivalent to sequence. And an essay could be equivalent to a film. So that's how you can try to contextualize how you look at language and literature and cinema, or a cinematic story, so to say. So you begin with a scene heading, which allows the person who is reading, whoever is reading the script, to get an idea where your scene is based, whether it is based inside of a location or outside. And then you specify the location. Then you also tell him or her what time of the day this shot is based. Right now, for example, we uh, we are having this virtual conversation, and then I'm taking this session inside this room. This is 5 o'clock in the evening, and I'm inside a room. So if I have to write this scene, then I would begin with interior study room, my house, evening, and then begin. So this part is called a scene heading. So what are the 7 elements of a scene or sequence and why they're crucial? These are the questions that you should ask and answer for yourself as a screenwriter. The first one is called a protagonist. These are the 7 elements. The first one is a protagonist. Who is a protagonist? Who has the most dramatic need in a scene? So the most dramatic need in a scene is the one who drives that scene. In other words, we can call that person a protagonist. What does this character want in the scene? Remember, characters are extremely crucial in giving you a certain shape of a scene or a film. So at the same time, you need to keep in mind where you are placing that character. If the dramatic need of that character is strong enough to hold that story, then we call that character a protagonist. What do we mean by a dramatic need? A dramatic need is something that the writer creates, a screenwriter creates, to take the story from one situation to another. A situation which is going to be based on some sort of a reason, some sort of a cause. So it is causality based. That's why we say that it is always reason and causality based. So you have to identify who your protagonist is and what does that person want. So it's the need of that protagonist which is going to help you frame that scene or write that scene. Then the next part is an antagonist. Antagonist is the person who opposes the dramatic need in the scene. So that tension that is created has to be in opposition to whatever the protagonist needs. So when you've written a character and you know what the dramatic need is, you have to create another character who is going to create conflict, who is not going to allow to achieve the dramatic need of the protagonist. And both the antagonist and the protagonist are supposed to create some sort of a tension, some sort of a conflict. If each of them want the same thing, then they must disagree on how to get it, which is what happens in classic love stories. You have protagonist love interest, and you have an antagonist. What we understand as let's say, we look at it as from a point of view of a triangular love story. 3 people are in a relationship. But are they in a relationship at the same time with each other? And is the relationship healthy between them? No, it is conflict ridden. The 2 people wanting the same person. And they are not ready to share obviously their love interest with each other. So this is where the disagreement sits in, and this is where the conflict sets in. And that is the reason why it's a very classical dramatic need. So from what point of view you are looking at the characters would help you define who is a protagonist and who is an antagonist. Unless that tension is built, unless that conflict is created, unless there is disagreement between these 2 characters, the scene will end up boring the reader, and ultimately, if it is in the film, it is going to bore the readers. So the reason why there are a lot of money that is invested into shooting a scene, and many times it doesn't make it to the final cut of the film, is because they right at the edit table, the editor and the creative team and the director decide that the scene is not contributing enough. So maybe it should be taken off, because it can affect the pacing of the film. It can affect how the film is joined or stitched. It's not building up enough. dramatic momentum to carry the narrative forward. So if there is no reason behind that, then why should we have that at the first place? So the first one is the protagonist, second one is the antagonist. Third element is what I call as the pivotal characters. These are the important characters. They are not the protagonist and antagonist, but they are the ones who would stand for or against these people, these characters in a scene. These characters have two purposes in a scene: keep the protagonist and antagonist engaged in a conflict, or provide a different point of view about the problem in the scene. So the problem is something that you have generated, the conflict. It's something that you have written. It's your deliberate causal attempt to etch the scene out. In that, if it is just about two characters, many a times you would run out of situations and sequences to take the narrative forward. That's why we need friends. That's why we need families. Otherwise, we would have just been alone. So if there are, in similar way, there is the role of our parents, the role of our friends, the role of our pets, role of an inspiring person, whosoever is there. These are the pivotal characters. Pretty much how they happen to exist in our own lives, they must also exist within the scene, within the film, close to the characters, irrespective of whether they are the protagonist or antagonist. They will support or they will oppose, they will create conflict. They need to be there to play that catalyst role sometimes to take the narrative forward. The fourth one is dialogue, one of the most crucial elements again in a scene. How do the characters communicate with each other? Is it through the spoken word? Do they do it non-verbally through actions, reactions, pure silences? Or is it a combination of both verbal and non-verbal communication? For example, a character can say, "I love you," and then turn her back, and by her expression, reveal to the audience that she is lying. It's a classic scene that if you have seen Gone Girl, you remember there's something that happens in one of the scenes. So what is the motivation to communicate? What is the need to communicate? And that communication that is happening between the characters, is it verbal? Is it non-verbal? Is it a combination of both? That gives us an understanding about dialogue. And dialogue writing, specifically for screenwriters, is a very important acquired skill. One must pick it up slowly and understand why a certain dialogue works, and certain times it doesn't work because it sounds literary, or it sounds not so engaging from the point of view of a film. That's why we would have grown up listening to this sort of conversation saying that please don't throw filmy dialogues at us, which means that it is a little over the top. It is something that kind of gives you an understanding of a little depth of the character or the characters. So as a screenwriter, you must observe how people talk. It would vary from place to place. It will vary from communities to communities, from individuals to individuals. If you are a keen observer, if you are drawing from real life, if you are drawing from cinema, if you are drawing from series, if you are drawing from experiences, then understand how this kind of dialogue writing can come into your own sort of screenwriting process. Fifth one is the intention. Why is each character there in the scene? The actors call it motivation. What is the motivation of the character? Why is the antagonist more stronger in a particular scene than the protagonist? Why does the protagonist appear so weak? And weakness is also another human emotion that needs to be brought in. People are motivated by love. People are motivated by ambitions. People are motivated by, you know, by victory. People are motivated or inspired by people again. So what motivates you as a screenwriter to create a motivational atmosphere or a motivational ambience for those characters? Whether they proceed negatively in that scene or positively in that scene, still that intention needs to be reflected somewhere, because that is going to act as a driving force behind creating the conflict in a scene. The scene works because there is conflict. But why is that conflict there at the first place? What is the intention of that character? Why do they get into conflict at the first place? And the conflict is not always about a physical fight. It can be placed in a psychological realm as well, where you are battling yourself. Many times that happens. So you need to identify the intention of those characters and subtly push it in a way that makes the scene work. Sixth element is called the subtext. Subtext defines what is the emotion bubble that is there underneath the scene. What is the scene really about? This element gets a cue from the theme of the screen story. If my story is based in remotest village of Kerala, where a family wants to relocate to Gulf for better opportunities, and it's divided on the lines that two of the people want to go and two of the people do not want to go. And your theme of the story is about migration and reverse migration, and they're touching upon those sociological scenarios. You need to identify if a particular scene is there, what is it conveying? Often as a screenwriter, you subconsciously write something that works for the scene. This is where you are slowly adding the subtextual layering, adding on a layer of emotion that would hold the scene together. Or scenes for that matter together. How do we place those emotions of the character? There could be a backstory to that as well. The conflict could be internal. So you have to internalize the character's universe or what they want to convey, and then look for those subtextual elements and see how they can be placed in a scene. You might not be able to do that in every scene. Every scene might not require that at the first place. But scenes coming together must have some sort of a subtextual reflection, that this is what is there underneath. It's like a subliminal element that is at play, that is not so pronounced, but when you think deeper as a reader or as a viewer, you are giving them enough material to chew on. That is a subtext. Seventh and the last one is called the context. How does the scene relate to what came before it and what comes after it? This element gives the writer the ability to give the same scene intense suspense and create comedic tone without even rewriting it. So it works like an interjection to the previous scene and the scene that is going to come. It builds the context for the next scene. If somebody gets killed in a house, revenge is one of the motivations that would keep the characters going. So if you are showing killing, if you are showing murder of a certain character who is dear to the protagonist, then that person is going to take revenge. So by showing murder or by writing that murder sequence, you're establishing the context for a violent turnout of events further. This is where you're contextualizing the crime. What is the motivation behind somebody trying to pickpocket, somebody trying to beg, somebody trying to steal? What is the motivation behind stealing? Is it because somebody is a kleptomaniac? Is it because somebody is actually born out of poverty and finds enough reason to live a better life for which he or she takes the path of crime? Is it politically motivated? So everything that you write needs to be contextualized in that sense. And one of the most strongest way of looking at how you can contextualize certain scenes and sequences within a film is to read as much as you can. When I'm saying reading, I'm not talking just about textual reading. I'm not talking about a book as a text. I'm talking about everything as a text. I'm talking about life as a text. I'm talking about your observational skills in everyday life, how much you are reading into yourself. It could be friends, families, the series that you watch, the music that you play or listen to, your travel experiences, your exposure, good and bad things that has happened to you in the past, or people you know of, your own relationship that has worked, not worked, with friends, families. So all these things can set a tone or a context for things. If you are an avid news viewer or a newspaper reader or magazine reader, you are likely to have a better understanding of the socio-political situation across the world. If I know about Lebanon and the political situation of Lebanon and the socio-historical conflict that comes out of it, likely that if I'm writing a story about that place, I can contextualize the situation. So this is how the scenes get stitched. While these 7 elements may appear simplistic, the viability of a screenplay depends on writing engaging scenes. And this approach can be an effective method to practice and improve the style and content of your screenplay. So keeping those 7 elements in the mind, you start developing your scenes. Let's look at how the environment is set up, the basics. Whether you're writing your first scene or the last scene, every screenplay scene starts with a slug line. What I was referring to as the scene headline or scene heading. It tells us if we are in an interior or an exterior place, where we are in general, and what time of the day. The screenplays scenes or slug lines look like something like this. Interior is referred to as INT or EXT. EXT refers to exterior, INT refers to interior. Then where we are, like I told you, I am in the study room. What time of the day it is evening. So if I am writing this scene where I am placing myself and this particular event where I am having a session with you, I'll write interior, study room, evening, and then begin my scene. Underneath this log line, you put the action. So here, what would be the action? The action would be that if this is the first scene, let's say that, okay, this, whatever, 30-odd-year-old guy in a t-shirt and, you know, a white t-shirt or whatever t-shirt is seated on the bed or the sofa with a earphone and laptop on and interacting with somebody. So that could be roughly what your action looks like. So once this log line is done, you move on to what the character is doing. After that, which is what you call as the action, following which the dialogue would come in. So here, whatever I'm saying will be the dialogue. Before that, whatever I'm doing is the action. Before that, where you have based your scene is going to be the slug line. Before you write a scene, you have to ask yourself, what do the characters want? Okay, this is one of the most basic things. Here, what do I want? In this scene, what do I want? I am doing this because it's a part of my job, or I'm interested in screenwriting, and I want to have an engaging session with you, so on and so forth. As soon as you can identify what they want, you can deny to them. Okay, so you are the best part about screenwriting is this: you are the master of your universe. You can kill, you can give birth to people, you can fly a tree, you can kill a dragon, you can do everything. So once you've identified what the characters want, you have to create the conflict, you have to create an obstacle. And the conflict goes hand in hand with all the obstacles. They feed off one another. So it's a series of obstacles that creates conflict. So no matter who is in the scene you are creating, you need to add an external and internal conflict to each scene. At least try. This duality of conflict will make your scene necessary in the story and keep the audiences interested. Because you're writing for a certain audience, try and understand the audience always get hooked up to the triumph. As it's universal to every human story. People want to see success. And before people want to see and experience success, they will have to undergo the journey of failures. Because otherwise, the success would not be as sweet as it is expected to be. So it's the wants plus obstacle that creates the conflict. What does the character want? And what kind of obstacle or hindrances or hurdles he or she going to face, which puts them in a situation of conflict. Whether that conflict is physical or emotional or psychological or internal in nature. Am I fighting myself? Or am I fighting the external world? Am I fighting people or am I fighting my own self? So that would create the sort of conflict or establish the sort of conflict. Setting the scene. When you first start out writing, you tend to have characters enter a room, speak for a while, and then have someone leave. This is what happens most of the times. So there's a standardized template that I'm talking about. So in most of the times, in a particular place, there are people who are doing something. And sometimes they step out of that scene, sometimes they stay, they continue to talk or whatever. What if you just throw people into the middle of a scene? Many times they enter. How late into the action can you start? How late in the conflict? By placing the conflict, how are you adding on more action? Are you beginning from where the conversation started? Or it's like a continuation? So those are the things that you need to keep in mind. Another scene structure idea to consider are the moving parts. What are the moving parts? Where there are more characters in a particular scene and they're constantly coming and going out of the frame. What is that setting like? A school assembly hall, 20 people in a sports ground, a bar kind of a setup where what you write offers a visual of a wide shop where there are so many people. One effective way to write and develop a scene structure is to follow this sort of a method called arrive late, leave early. So what happens here is, see, is that conflict which is almost getting chained. Arrive late, which means you are already creating anticipation within the audience's or reader's mind, what is going to happen. And when you leave early, when your characters leave early, it also kind of motivates the audience to move along with the character to see where they're heading to. Why did they leave early? So it's conflict one and conflict two, which is merging to give you a better scene. Arriving late in the scene builds tension and allows us to have the conflict right away in the scene. We know what's going on, and it's a killer first scene in the movie. We are hooked right away. So you don't have to wait for a really long time to establish. You can straight away get into that scene. It works especially in the context of action dramas, things that has happened. You begin with a death scene, a gruesome death, violent scene, and then go back in flashback and flash forward and start giving in nuggets, give information to people what has led into that kind of a conflict, if it is at all there. What if you want to keep the audience's attention for a much longer period of time? That probably requires a scene with tons of moving parts. People keep moving, coming. So multiple characters, lot of dialogue, even some actions back and forth. This is what happens in a Tarantino film. In a Quentin Tarantino film, if you would see and pick up any Quentin Tarantino film, most of the times you will see that. There are very lengthy dialogues, there are multiple characters, and they keep switching from one accent to another. It's all happening in one scene. And it's happening back and forth. Show, don't tell. That's one of the thumb rules of screenwriting. Most of the times you'll come across people, screenwriters tell you this, that you have to show, not tell. What does that mean? Writing scene is harder than just deciding on a conflict. You also have to see what you can convey with just actions, not dialogue. Only through action. So you're constantly writing the longer ones without engaging into any kind of a verbal, non-verbal communication. You're communicating just through visuals, and you're writing that visuals in terms of whatever your characters are doing. Challenge yourself to express the conflict on the page without using any spoken word. Sure, an action scene makes sense here, but what about a scene that just shows us everything that we need to know? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the opening scene of one of the most award-winning screenplays of all time, a film called There Will Be Blood. And then we're going to talk about it a bit. So here is this, I mean, few scenes where there is no dialogue and a lot of writing in terms of action. It contextualizes what you see in terms of a geography, one person, possibly the protagonist of the film, and offers you some sort of an idea about what his universe could possibly be, how hard, how difficult it is or it could be, what are his desires, what could be his conflict. His conflict right in this situation is to get out of the situation where he is. So without getting into dialogues, without um, you know showing a lot of grandeur, you can simply establish the conflict. You can simply bring in obstacles into people's life and enjoy the load of writing scenes that works in terms of the desires, in terms of the conflict, in terms of the obstacles, in terms of what the characters want to take the narrative forward. Okay, so just read through this. I have shared this slide for you to read through. So I'm not going to do the talking. Um, just read through how this thing is written, whatever you saw here. So there's the title called There Will Be Blood, Exterior, New Mexico, Desert, Day 1898. This shooting draft. So that's why you have the camera angle and other things you might ignore. Just look at the action portion that is written.
Yes, sir.
So you have slug lines. Later, you have the action portion that is written. And since there are no dialogues, it moves from one scene to another. The scene transition is written. A scene transition is written in this two pages, as you can see, is where we are cutting from one scene to another. That's why we cut from one scene to another. That's why we use the transition called cut to. We cut to from scene one, scene two, to scene two to scene three. Then there's something that you would see in the next page. There's scene 4 and scene 4A. So it's part of one scene, or 6 or 6A, or 7 or 7A, which means it's an extension of that scene. So since they're changing the position of the camera constantly to give a better understanding of the action portion, these scenes get extended. Let me know when you're done with the reading.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, done.
All right. That brings me to the last part. So whether you are writing love scenes, fight scenes, or just two people talking, keep in mind what the wants and desires of each characters are. For you to set up a scene, for you to create an environment in which your scene could be based in, and that scene works. We say that this is an award-winning scene, or this is a scene that enthralled me. Even as an audience, we feel extremely elated, or we feel extremely invested or engaged into a scene because the level of the wants and desires of the characters goes up, and whatever they are going to see, whatever they are going to do, is something that keeps us uh, keeps us hooked to this. And as a screenwriter, the more you deny them their goal, whatever they want to achieve, the more scope and opportunity you would have to add on more values to the scenes or the sequences in the film. So your entire story should be built on character desperate to achieve something. Your plot line would move along, your subtext would emerge, your context would come in, all these things in and around your characters, whatever they are doing in the story. So if you feel confident that you know how to write a scene, then go out there and put it into the action. Write ultimately whatever makes you happy and anticipate what makes the audience stay tuned. If you're writing for an audience, a defined audience, more so, then keep in mind what kind of things people may like. And ultimately, enjoy the process of writing. Unless you do so, it doesn't make much sense, because remember, you are doing it for yourself. Nobody's forcing you to become a screenwriter. You want to write a film because you are invested into the process, you enjoy the process. So you try and do that. There's a small little exercise that I would want you guys to take up, so I wanted to run you through that as the last slide. So start with a single sentence idea. For example, infidelity in a marriage, face to face with an alien being, a husband of 20 years is a serial killer, love at first sight. These are few of the cues that are used as single sentence ideas across. And then there are those scenes that are developed. The goal is to improve your ability to write cinematic scenes and sequences. Pick one idea or make up your own. These are the examples that are most easily illustrated. That's why I use them. And then you can come up with your own single sentence idea and then write it in 3 different ways. Okay, the ways that we kind of spoke about. The first approach is using only spoken dialogue. Keep it short, around 2 to 3 pages maximum. So start with a single idea, use the spoken dialogue, and develop the scenes. Next is write the same scene using only actions and nonverbal dialogues. You need to translate the spoken one to recognizable visual actions and reactions. Whatever your characters are doing in those scenes, they are not talking, they are just doing something. So it's the doing part you are writing. You are showing the audience or the reader whatever they are going to do or they're doing. Finally, rewrite the same scene or scenes, focusing on improving the visuals, but this time write a single line of dialogue to capture the subtext or theme of the scene. So in each scene, you use 1 or 2 dialogues at best. So that it kind of works at a subliminal level in taking the scenes forward. The scenes could be interconnected or disjointed, whatever. Remember, they must reflect that single sentence idea that you want to project on or you want to write or talk about. So that's more or less what I wanted to share about setting up the scenes and how to develop an environment and see how those scenes work out within that environment. I'll stop here. Thank you.